Tonight, we are traveling back to a time before the air became familiar, a moment when survival depended on avoiding what would one day sustain us. The air itself was still taking shape. Long before animals, forests, or flowing breaths, Earth was already alive, crowded, and stable. Life moved through oceans thick with chemistry that worked, a biosphere that had no need for oxygen and no defense against it. For ages beyond counting, this world held together, balanced and enduring. Then something small began to change everything. Simple organisms release a byproduct into their surroundings, not with intention or malice, but as a consequence of living. Evidence suggests this new gas crept outward, pooling slowly, altering waters first, then rising into the sky, unnoticed and unstoppable. Oxygen was not passive. At the cellular level, it tore apart delicate molecular systems, unraveling chemistry that had functioned flawlessly for eons. Entire forms of life, perfectly adapted to their world, began to fail in silence, not from catastrophe, but from exposure. This transformation did not arrive with noise or spectacle. It unfolded over stretches of time so vast there was nowhere to flee, only adaptation or disappearance. But how did a substance created by life become its greatest threat? What happens when the environment turns against the organisms that shaped it? How did survival begin to depend on enduring something once lethal? And what does it mean when a planet changes without violence? Tonight, we will drift toward the moment when the air itself begins rewriting the rules of existence. But before we continue, if you enjoy these calm explorations into Earth's quiet mysteries, I'd love it if you gently tapped like or subscribed. And if you feel like it, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. And for those already subscribed, thank you for being part of this calm little corner of science. So now take a deep breath, let your shoulders loosen, and together let us ease into the story of the air that nearly erased life. Long before air carried familiarity, the surface of the planet moved with quiet purpose. Oceans stirred under dim light, layered with currents that mixed heat, minerals, and dissolved gases into steady circulation. Shores did not yet host plants or animals, yet the waters themselves were active and crowded, dense with microscopic life performing the work of survival. This was not a waiting Earth. It was already busy, already full, already occupied by organisms woven tightly into their surroundings. Within those waters, life followed pathways shaped entirely by chemistry that required no oxygen. Cells drew energy from reactions between metals, sulfur compounds, and carbon based molecules drifting through the sea. Metabolism unfolded without breath or flame, powered by gradients and exchanges that functioned reliably in darkness and depth. Oxygen held no promise here. It offered no advantage, no efficiency, no role in the systems that had already solved the problem of living. The absence of oxygen was not a limitation, but a foundation. Enzymes, membranes, and internal chemistry evolved in an environment where reactive gases would have been destructive. Cellular machinery was delicate in its own way, precise and stable within the conditions that surrounded it. What mattered was consistency. The oceans provided that consistency, maintaining temperatures and chemical balances that shifted slowly, gently, over immense spans of time. This stability allowed ecosystems to layer and interlock. Waste from one organism became nourishment for another. Energy passed through invisible chains that stretched across entire basins. Microbial mats spread across seafloors and shallow shelves, thick and textured, shaping sediments grain by grain. These communities were resilient, not through strength or speed, but through deep compatibility with their world. Nothing strained against the atmosphere above, because the atmosphere had little relevance to life below. For hundreds of millions of years, this arrangement endured. Continents moved, volcanoes released gases, asteroids passed unnoticed. Through it all, life persisted in forms that fit perfectly within their chemical surroundings. There was no sense of anticipation, no pressure toward transformation. The systems in place worked quietly and completely, sustaining a living planet without breath, without fire, without skyward dependence. From a distant view, this early Earth lacked drama, yet it possessed coherence. Its biosphere rested on relationships forged slowly and held steady by repetition. The chemistry of the oceans remained a dependable home, and life responded by filling every available niche. Nothing in this world required oxygen, and nothing expected it. The planet had already found a balance that asked for nothing more than time. Some lives unfold entirely beyond air, sealed within chemistry, that never learn to coexist with oxygen. These organisms still exist, tucked into sediments, deep waters, and hidden pockets of the planet, carrying a way of living that predates the sky we know. They are called anaerobes, not as a category of weakness, but as a description of independence. Oxygen plays no role in their survival. It never did. Inside these cells, energy flows along pathways shaped for a different world. Reactions rely on molecules that remain stable only in the absence of oxygen. Iron stays soluble, sulfur retains its bonds, carbon compounds cycle without interruption. The internal balance is precise, calibrated to conditions that persisted long before air became reactive. For these organisms, metabolism is not built to tolerate intrusion. Their chemistry assumes a gentler environment, one where electrons move predictably and reactions complete without interference. When oxygen enters such a system, it does not behave politely. It reacts aggressively, stripping electrons, breaking bonds, and producing unstable byproducts that ripple through the cell. Proteins lose their shape, membranes weaken, enzymes fail to complete the reactions they were crafted to perform. Damage spreads faster than repair can respond. What had once functioned seamlessly begins to unravel, not from age or scarcity, but from contact with something unfamiliar. This vulnerability does not mark inferiority, it reflects specialization. These organisms evolved in harmony with their surroundings, shaped by an environment that rewarded efficiency without oxygen. Their cells are streamlined, avoiding the burden of defensive systems they never needed. Complexity exists, but it is directed inward, focused on extraction of energy from sources invisible to most modern life. Nothing about this design is accidental. It is the result of long refinement under stable conditions. For vast stretches of time, this way of life dominated the planet. Anaerobic organisms formed dense communities, sustained cycles, and transformed landscapes at scales too small to see, yet too large to ignore. They altered minerals, influenced sediments, and maintained ecosystems that asked nothing from the atmosphere above. Their success was measured not in speed or size, but in persistence. Seen from the present, it is tempting to mistake absence of oxygen for limitation. Yet within their native conditions, these organisms were complete. They occupied niches perfectly matched to their chemistry. They endured not because they were waiting to evolve further, but because they already fit. Oxygen was never part of the plan, and for most of Earth's history, it did not need to be. Even now, traces of this ancient foundation remain alive beneath layers of change. In environments where oxygen cannot reach, these organisms continue their quiet work, unchanged in principle, still thriving where the air holds no power. Long after life had settled into patterns that held steady, a new presence began interacting with cells in ways no chemistry before it had done. Oxygen moved easily through membranes, slipping into places meant for more predictable molecules. Its small size and restless nature allowed it to reach deep into cellular interiors, where reactions were finely balanced and carefully contained. At the molecular level, oxygen rarely remained still. It sought electrons aggressively, pulling them from nearby compounds and leaving fragments behind. These fragments, known as reactive oxygen species, carried instability forward, colliding with proteins, lipids, and genetic material. Bonds bent out of shape. Structures meant to fold precisely lost their alignment. A single reaction could cascade into many, spreading disruption through systems that depended on order. This process is what later biology would call oxidative stress. It is not a sudden collapse, but an accumulation of tiny injuries occurring faster than a cell can repair them. Lipid membranes grow porous. Enzymes lose the contours that allow them to function. DNA strands suffer breaks that interrupt replication and expression. None of this requires violence or force. It arises naturally from oxygen's chemistry, from its tendency to react rather than remain inert. For cells never exposed to such behavior, these reactions arrived without warning. Their internal systems lacked safeguards. No buffering molecules waited to intercept radicals. No specialized enzymes stood ready to neutralize damage. The chemistry inside these organisms had evolved under assumptions that no longer held true. Processes that once completed smoothly now produced harmful byproducts as oxygen interfered with every step. Oxygen's impact was not uniform. Some reactions slowed, others accelerated uncontrollably. Energy production became erratic, not because resources vanished, but because pathways were disrupted mid-flow. What made this especially destructive was its persistence. Oxygen did not strike once and retreat. It lingered, entering cells repeatedly, ensuring that damage accumulated rather than healed. This behavior reveals oxygen's nature as biologically aggressive. It does not wait to be invited into metabolism. It reshapes chemistry simply by existing within it. In environments where life had no defense, its presence alone altered the rules governing molecular stability. Oxygen did not need intention, its properties were sufficient. Over time, the difference between cells that could tolerate this chemistry and those that could not became stark. Survival no longer depended solely on acquiring energy or maintaining structure, but on managing constant molecular assault. For many organisms, this threshold was insurmountable. Their chemistry had been perfected for a quieter world. What makes this moment significant is not that oxygen damaged life, but that damage was unavoidable once exposure began. The same reactions that make oxygen useful for extracting energy also make it dangerous. Its power lies in reactivity, and reactivity carries consequence. At the smallest scales of life, oxygen behaved less like a background condition and more like an active force, reshaping biology through chemistry alone. In this way, oxygen functioned as a cellular weapon without design or intent, altering survival at the level of molecules long before its presence became obvious in the wider world. At certain hours, when light touched shallow water, chemistry behaved differently. Sunlit surfaces began to host reactions that did not occur below, where darkness kept older balances intact. In these illuminated pockets, tiny organisms captured energy and released a new gas as a simple byproduct. It did not spread far. It lingered close, dissolving into nearby water, fading again as conditions shifted. These early traces of oxygen formed quietly and unevenly. Thin layers along shorelines, microbial mats bathed in daylight, films drifting near the surface, each produced small amounts that never accumulated for long. Surrounding chemistry absorbed it readily. Dissolved iron and other reduced elements reacted immediately, binding oxygen and removing it from circulation. What little appeared was quickly consumed, folded back into the familiar cycles that had governed the planet for ages. Because of this, nothing seemed broken. Life beyond these zones continued unchanged. Deeper waters remained oxygen free, stable and protective. Metabolic pathways that could not tolerate exposure carried on without disruption. Even near the surface, the gas rarely persisted long enough to cause widespread harm. It was a flicker, not a presence, a brief disturbance smoothed away by the environment itself. The planet possessed many buffers. Oceans were vast and chemically rich. Rocks at the seafloor pulled oxygen from solution. Volcanic gases rising through the atmosphere reacted readily, neutralizing any escape upward. Each sink acted like a quiet hand, guiding the new gas back into forms the world already knew how to manage. From a distance, Earth still appeared unchanged. Yet, these moments mattered. Each brief appearance altered local chemistry just slightly before vanishing. Reactions left residues. Minerals shifted state. Microbial communities at the margins adapted to fleeting exposure, even as their deeper relatives remained untouched. No single event carried consequence on its own, but the pattern repeated endlessly, day after day, season after season, over stretches of time too slow to notice. The delay lay in scale. Oxygen production had begun, but accumulation had not. The system could absorb only so much before saturation approached. As long as sinks outpaced sources, balance held. Life continued under the assumption that conditions were stable, that the chemical rules of survival would remain fixed. The crisis was not absent, it was postponed. This is how the first signs of transformation appeared without urgency. Nothing collapsed, nothing rushed. The changes moved at the pace of chemistry, measured in countless small reactions rather than sudden events. Oxygen entered the story softly, as a local curiosity, easily erased and easily ignored. In this early phase, the future was not visible. The gas that would later reshape the planet existed only in fragments, appearing and disappearing without ceremony. Yet with every repetition, the margin narrowed. The system leaned subtly toward a different outcome, carried forward not by catastrophe, but by persistence. The oceans carried memory in their chemistry. For countless ages, dissolved metals drifted freely through seawater, remaining available, predictable, and quietly essential. Iron moved easily, feeding reactions at the heart of many ecosystems. Other elements followed similar paths, cycling through living communities and sediments in balanced exchange. This chemical openness had long supported life without friction. As oxygen lingered longer near the surface, these relationships began to shift. When oxygen encountered dissolved iron, it reacted immediately. The metal changed state, no longer remaining soluble, no longer moving freely through the water column. Instead, it formed particles that clumped together and sank, settling slowly toward the seafloor. What had once been accessible vanished from circulation, removed not by scarcity, but by transformation. This process unfolded gradually and unevenly. Shallow waters changed first, then broader regions as oxygen appeared more often and persisted a little longer each time. Rust-colored sediments spread in thin layers, marking places where chemistry had crossed a threshold. Iron, once abundant, became locked away in mineral form, altering the availability of nutrients that entire microbial communities relied upon. The loss extended beyond a single element. Oxygen reactions rippled outward, reshaping the balance of sulfur, nitrogen, and carbon compounds. Some reactions that once flowed smoothly slowed or ceased altogether. Others produced byproducts that accumulated in unfamiliar ways. The oceans did not become hostile overnight, but they grew less forgiving. Chemistry that had remained stable for immense spans of time now shifted just enough to strain existing systems. Food chains responded quietly. Organisms at the base of these networks found their resources altered or reduced. Microbes that depended on dissolved metals struggled as concentrations fell. Those changes traveled upward, thinning layers of interdependence that had taken shape slowly over the ages. No dramatic collapse followed, no sudden clearing of life, only a subtle loss of support that made survival more difficult with each passing cycle. What made this destabilization so effective was its silence. Life adapted locally where it could, but the changes were planetary in direction. Oceans mixed slowly, spreading altered chemistry far from its points of origin. Even regions that rarely encountered oxygen directly felt its influence through depleted nutrients and disrupted cycles. The sea remained vast and full, yet its internal balance shifted away from conditions life had long depended upon. In this way, the oceans began to turn, not through aggression or upheaval, but through chemistry adjusting its preferences. Elements essential to life slipped out of reach, energy pathways weakened, ecosystems grew thinner at their foundations. The water itself did not reject life, but it no longer upheld it as easily as before. These changes marked a quiet pivot. The oceans still appeared calm, still carried motion and depth, yet their chemistry had started favoring a different future. Life continued, but now on altered terms, sustained by a system that was gradually withdrawing the conditions that once made it secure. Above the oceans, the atmosphere responded more slowly, but it did respond. For a long while, the sky had been shaped by gases that interacted gently with light and heat. Methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen mingled in proportions that trapped warmth efficiently, keeping the surface temperate beneath a fainter sun. The air did not resemble what we know now, but it performed its role with quiet reliability. As oxygen began persisting beyond brief moments, it entered this aerial mixture and altered its balance. Oxygen proved reactive not only in water, but in the air itself. One of its most influential interactions involved methane, a gas that had long lingered in abundance. When oxygen encountered methane, the two reacted, breaking methane apart and transforming it into carbon dioxide and water vapor. Each reaction thinned the blanket that had helped hold planetary warmth. This loss happened gradually, dispersed across the globe. No single place announced the change. Methane concentrations declined step by step, each reaction modest on its own, yet cumulative in effect. With less methane present, the atmosphere trapped less heat. Sunlight still reached the surface, but more warmth slipped away into space after nightfall, altering long established energy flows. The planet did not freeze suddenly. Instead, cooling arrived as a slow recalibration. Average temperatures edged downward. Seasonal contrasts sharpened slightly. Regions that had once remained stable drifted toward cooler norms. Ice did not surge outward in a single advance. It appeared tentatively, withdrew, then returned more persistently as conditions allowed. What made this shift remarkable was its subtlety. Life below continued much as before, unaware of atmospheric chemistry unfolding overhead. The sky offered no immediate signal. Clouds still formed. Winds still moved. Yet the protective warmth that had lingered for ages was weakening. molecule by molecule, reaction by reaction. Oxygen did not need to dominate the atmosphere to cause this change. Even at modest levels, its influence reshaped gas interactions in ways that mattered profoundly. Methane, once stable, became fleeting. Heat retention weakened. The atmosphere grew thinner in its ability to buffer the surface against a cooling universe. This transformation unfolded without spectacle. There were no storms announcing a new era, no visible boundary marking before and after. The sky remained familiar to anything that might have looked upward, even as its composition quietly crossed into unfamiliar territory. Cooling settled in as a background condition rather than an event. Over long stretches of time, this cooler world altered rates of weathering, patterns of circulation, and the exchange between air and sea. Each adjustment fed into the next, reinforcing the trend without urgency. The atmosphere had begun favoring a different equilibrium, one less forgiving than before. In this way, the sky changed well before anyone could have noticed. Its gases shifted patiently, reshaping climate not through force but through chemistry. What had once been a steady shelter became slightly less so, setting the stage for consequences that would unfold far below, carried quietly by colder air and dimmer warmth. Balance often appears stable until it is not. For long stretches, Earth's chemistry hovered within ranges that quietly corrected themselves. When new substances entered the system, they were absorbed, transformed, or removed, and the larger pattern held. Change arrived, but it arrived slowly enough that the planet returned to familiar states without effort or notice. A tipping point is reached when this self correction weakens. It does not announce itself. Instead, small additions begin to linger rather than vanish. Oxygen crossed this line not through a single surge, but through repetition. Each appearance left a faint residue, each cycle ending with slightly more remaining than before. What once disappeared as quickly as it formed now stayed, thinly at first, then with increasing confidence. This persistence altered the balance of reactions that had previously kept oxygen rare. The oceans and rocks continued to absorb it, but their capacity was no longer endless. Reactive elements became tied up, sea floors filled with altered minerals, and the sinks that once erased oxygen lost their speed. The gas no longer returned fully to the chemistry that preceded it. It remained present between cycles, waiting. Once oxygen endured from one moment to the next, the rules changed. New oxygen encountered an environment already carrying traces of its kind. Instead of starting from absence, accumulation began from a baseline. This shifted the direction of the system. Removal processes could not keep pace with production, not because they failed, but because the scale had grown beyond them. The transition was not dramatic. From the surface, the planet still looked much the same. Oceans continued to move. The sky continued its slow circulation. Yet beneath that calm, chemistry had committed to a new trajectory. Oxygen was no longer a guest, it had become a resident. After this threshold, reversal was no longer possible in practical terms. Even if production slowed, the existing oxygen sustained reactions that reinforced its presence. Metals remained locked away. Methane stayed scarce. Cooling continued gently. Each consequence fed into others, creating a network of changes that supported the new balance rather than undoing it. This is the quiet nature of planetary commitment. Earth did not decide to change. It followed chemistry to its logical conclusion once conditions allowed persistence. The path forward narrowed, not by force, but by momentum. Oxygen remained because the world around it had adjusted just enough to let it stay. From this point onward, The planet carried oxygen as a permanent feature. The threshold had been crossed without ceremony, and the door behind it closed without sound. Earth had entered a state it could not return from, guided by accumulation rather than intent, and sustained by a chemistry that no longer remembered how to let oxygen disappear. The loss did not arrive as an event that could be pointed to in time. It did not strike from outside or tear across the surface. Instead, life thinned. Entire lineages faded not through sudden death, but through conditions that no longer allowed them to persist. When scientists look back on this interval, they recognize it as a mass extinction because of what vanished, not because of how it happened. At its core, a mass extinction is defined by scope. It marks a period when a vast proportion of existing life disappears across many environments, leaving behind a biosphere fundamentally altered. During this time, the majority of organisms that had shaped the planet's ecosystems were erased, not in a single sweep, but through countless small losses accumulating until absence became the dominant signal. The pace was slow, measured in spans of time so long that individual extinctions blurred together. Populations declined as chemistry shifted, habitats narrowed, metabolic pathways failed to function under new conditions. Generation by generation, fewer descendants survived, until some forms of life simply ended. There was no boundary between before and after that life could recognize. The extinction unfolded while the planet continued moving, turning, and circulating as it always had. This scale makes the event difficult to visualize. Later extinctions are often marked by dramatic layers, by sudden changes preserved in sediments. Here, the record is quieter. The organisms most affected were small, soft-bodied, and microbial. They left few fossils behind. Their disappearance is inferred not from skeletons, but from gaps in chemistry, from minerals that change state, from signals written into ancient rocks rather than bones. What remains of the victims exists mostly as absence. Certain metabolic signatures vanish from the record. Isotopic patterns shift. Rock layers capture the aftereffects of altered oceans and skies, but not the lives that once filled them. This makes the extinction feel invisible, even though its reach was planetary. The world lost much of its biological diversity without leaving clear monuments to what had been there. Despite this silence, the impact was profound. Ecosystems were stripped back to simpler forms. Entire branches of the tree of life ended, leaving no descendants to carry their designs forward. The survivors represented only a fraction of what had once lived, shaped as much by chance as by compatibility with the new environment. The absence of disaster does not lessen the magnitude. This was the first time Earth nearly erased itself biologically, not through violence, but through transformation. Life did not lose a battle. It lost the conditions that had sustained it. When scientists name this moment a mass extinction, they do so to acknowledge the scale of loss hidden within stillness, a planetary reshaping marked not by destruction, but by disappearance. Cold did not arrive as ice at first. It began as imbalance, a slight mismatch between incoming light and retained warmth. As oxygen settled into permanence, its earlier reactions in air and water continued to thin the gases that had held heat close to the surface. The planet lost energy quietly, not in shocks, but in small daily deficits that accumulated over immense spans of time. With less methane circulating above and altered chemistry below, Earth drifted toward cooler conditions. High latitudes felt the change first, though no life observed it as an event. Ice appeared where seasonal melt once prevailed, lingering a little longer before retreating. Over time, these pockets expanded. Reflective surfaces replaced darker ones, sending more sunlight back into space and reinforcing the cooling already underway. The oceans responded alongside the land. Colder water circulated differently, layering in ways that altered nutrient delivery. Mixing slowed in some regions. Deep waters grew more isolated, and chemical exchanges weakened. The same oxygen that had removed key metals from circulation now intersected with lower temperatures, compounding stress on ecosystems already stretched thin. Life that depended on stable conditions faced environments that no longer offered consistency. As glaciations advanced and withdrew in pulses, survival narrowed further. Cold, limited metabolic rates, altered chemistry, restricted energy pathways. Food networks, already thinned by earlier disruptions, struggled to support the same diversity. These pressures did not arrive one at a time. They overlapped, reinforcing one another in ways that left little room for recovery. Cooling magnified chemical stress, and chemical stress deepened ecological loss. What collapsed was not life everywhere at once, but complexity. Layers that had taken ages to assemble peeled away. Simple systems replaced richer ones. The biosphere shrank toward forms able to tolerate scarcity, cold, and chemical instability simultaneously. Many could not. Their absence did not leave scars that were easy to see, only a quieter world with fewer pathways for energy to travel. The planet itself remained active throughout this transition. Ice sheets grew and receded. Oceans continued their slow circulation. Volcanism and weathering persisted. Yet the combined effect of oxygen accumulation, atmospheric change, ocean chemistry, and cooling had shifted Earth into a harsher state. Conditions that once supported broad abundance now favored endurance over diversity. This turning toward cold marked more than a climate shift. It represented the convergence of multiple stresses into a single, sustained pressure on life. Oxygen had altered the rules of chemistry. Cooling reshaped habitats. Together, they created a world that no longer resembled the stable cradle life had known. Earth did not freeze solid, nor did it empty entirely, but it crossed into an era where survival demanded alignment with a colder, more demanding planet. As conditions shifted above and across the oceans, life did not vanish everywhere at once. It moved inward and downward, seeking places where oxygen could not follow easily. Beneath the surface, layers of water remained isolated from the changing sky. In deep basins, beneath sediments, and within pores of rock, chemistry stayed familiar. These spaces became refuges not by design, but by position. Here, oxygen struggled to persist. Circulation was slow, light absent, and reactions that consumed the gas still outpaced its arrival. The deeper waters retained their older character, rich in dissolved compounds that supported long-established metabolisms. Sediments blanketed these zones, sealing them further from intrusion. Life continued within narrow margins, sustained by gradients of chemistry rather than open exchange with the atmosphere. Beyond the oceans, refuge worlds also existed within the planet itself. Cracks in rock, hydrothermal systems, and buried environments offered shelter where heat and chemistry replaced sunlight and air. Minerals provided energy. Fluids carried nutrients. These settings were not expansive, but they were stable enough to persist while conditions elsewhere became hostile. Withdrawal became a viable strategy, not through movement in space, but through retreat into complexity beneath surfaces. In these havens, ecosystems simplified and endured. Diversity narrowed, but continuity remained. Lineages adjusted to reduced resources and confined spaces. Interactions grew more localized. The broader biosphere above might have been thinning, yet below, life maintained itself in pockets that followed older rules. Survival depended not on confronting change, but on staying where change arrived last. Many of these environments still exist today. Anoxic basins linger in modern seas. Deep sediments shelter communities untouched by air. Subsurface microbes thrive kilometers below ground, drawing energy from rock and water rather than from oxygen or light. These organisms carry echoes of ancient survival, not as relics frozen in time, but as living systems that remain compatible with conditions resembling the distant past. Their presence reveals something essential about life during this transition. Survival did not always mean adaptation to oxygen. In many cases, it meant avoidance. The planet offered multiple layers, and life learned to occupy the quieter ones. Where chemistry remained stable, persistence was possible, even as surface environments crossed irreversible thresholds. This retreat shaped the future as much as extinction did. By enduring in isolation, these organisms preserved metabolic diversity that might otherwise have vanished entirely. They maintained alternative ways of living that continued alongside oxygen based systems without merging with them. Earth became layered, not only physically, but biologically, hosting parallel worlds separated by chemistry rather than distance. Refuge did not represent victory, it represented continuity. Life survived by narrowing its footprint, by accepting limits, by remaining where conditions still aligned with its design. In doing so, it demonstrated a quiet resilience, not through expansion, but through withdrawal into the parts of the planet where oxygen's reach remained incomplete. Survival did not belong to the strongest or the most complex. It emerged unevenly, scattered among organisms whose internal chemistry happened to tolerate what the planet was becoming. As oxygen reshaped oceans and air, a small portion of life endured not through dominance, but through flexibility that was never designed for this moment, yet proved sufficient. Some organisms carried metabolic pathways that allowed them to shift quietly between chemical options. When familiar reactions weakened, alternatives remained available. These cells could draw energy from different sources, adjust internal balances, and reroute processes without collapsing entirely. Their systems were not optimized for oxygen, but they were not fully broken by it either. This tolerance provided a narrow corridor through which survival remained possible. Others possessed protective chemistry by chance rather than foresight. Molecules that reduced damage, scavenged reactive byproducts, or slowed harmful reactions already existed for unrelated reasons. In an altered world, these traits gained new significance. What had once been incidental became essential. Survival followed the presence of tools already at hand, not the invention of new ones. Flexibility also appeared in structure. Some organisms lived in gradients rather than fixed conditions, moving subtly between layers where chemistry varied. This mobility allowed partial avoidance of stress without complete retreat. They occupied edges, zones where oxygen appeared but did not yet dominate, adjusting position as conditions fluctuated. Their endurance came from remaining between extremes. Yet adaptation alone does not explain the pattern. Chance shaped outcomes at every scale. Entire groups vanished while others persisted despite similar designs. Small differences in timing, location, or exposure determined whether a lineage encountered oxygen before defenses existed or after tolerance emerged. Survival was not evenly distributed across forms that seemed equally prepared. This randomness becomes clear when viewed across deep time. Many organisms with potential flexibility still disappeared. Others endured despite narrow margins. The survivors were not champions of a new world, only inhabitants that happened to overlap with its requirements. Their continued existence reflects compatibility rather than progress. As conditions stabilized into a more oxygenated state, these surviving organisms carried forward traits shaped by both necessity and accident. Their descendants would later expand into new roles, but at this stage, endurance was quiet and constrained. Life persisted in forms that could absorb stress without unraveling, even if only barely. What makes these survivors strange is not their resilience alone, but the absence of intention behind it. They did not evolve to meet oxygen. They endured because their existing chemistry could bend without breaking. The future of life passed through narrow gates, defined by circumstance as much as design. In this thinning biosphere, survival became a matter of alignment. Those aligned by chance and flexibility endured. Others faded, leaving behind no descendants, no fossils, and little record beyond the chemistry of a planet that continued to change around them. Endurance did not emerge as a breakthrough. It took shape slowly, through small adjustments that reduced harm rather than eliminated it. As oxygen persisted, some surviving organisms began to carry chemistry that softened its effects, not because oxygen was useful, but because without protection, survival narrowed further. Tolerance became a matter of survival rather than advantage. Inside cells, early defenses appeared as modest interventions. Certain molecules reacted with oxygen's unstable byproducts before those fragments could spread damage. These molecules did not stop oxygen from entering, nor did they make it safe. They simply intercepted the most reactive pieces, absorbing instability and releasing it in quieter forms. Damage still occurred, but less often and more slowly. These substances are known today as antioxidants. In essence, they acted as chemical cushions. When reactive oxygen species formed, antioxidants offered electrons of their own, stabilizing those fragments before they could tear through proteins, membranes, or genetic material. The process reduced chaos rather than restoring order. Cells remained under constant stress, yet that stress became survivable. The presence of these defenses did not mean organisms welcomed oxygen. Metabolism remained shaped by older pathways, and oxygen continued to interfere with reactions. Antioxidants existed alongside damage, not in place of it. Their role was to limit loss, to give cells time to repair what could be repaired, and continue operating despite constant chemical friction. Other defenses followed similar logic. Enzymes evolved that could convert dangerous oxygen byproducts into less reactive forms. Membrane changes reduced permeability. Repair mechanisms addressed broken molecules more efficiently. None of these changes transformed oxygen into a benefit. They simply allowed life to function in its presence without immediate collapse. What is important is how constrained these adaptations were. They did not spread uniformly across life. They emerged unevenly, depending on existing chemistry and circumstance. Some lineages gained partial protection, others did not. Even among those with defenses, survival remained uncertain, contingent on environment, exposure, and timing. This was not progress toward complexity or power. It was an act of endurance. Organisms were responding to a condition they could not remove. Oxygen was now part of the world, and chemistry had to accommodate it or fade. The defenses that appeared were shaped by necessity alone, driven by pressure rather than opportunity. Through these changes, Life learned to persist under chemical stress without mastering it. Oxygen remained dangerous. Antioxidants reduced harm, but demanded energy to maintain. Protection carried cost, and that cost narrowed possibilities elsewhere. Survival involved trade offs that limited growth and experimentation. Learning to endure the poison did not mark a turning point toward dominance, it marked a holding pattern. Life stabilized just enough to remain present in a transformed world, carrying scars of chemistry within every cell. These early defenses were not steps forward, they were compromises that allowed existence to continue under conditions that would otherwise have ended it. Energy had always been the quiet constraint shaping life's possibilities. Before oxygen, cells harvested what they could from limited reactions, drawing modest returns from chemistry that favored stability over yield. Survival depended on sufficiency rather than surplus. As oxygen persisted, a new pathway slowly became available, not as an invitation, but as an option discovered under pressure. Within some organisms, oxygen began to serve as a powerful partner in energy extraction. Its reactivity, once purely destructive, allowed electrons to fall farther, releasing greater amounts of usable energy along the way. The same chemistry that tore apart delicate molecules could, when carefully controlled, drive reactions that produced far more energy from the same resources. This shift did not create new food. It allowed deeper access to what was already there. Cells that managed this process could store more energy, repair damage more efficiently, and sustain complex internal activity for longer periods. The payoff was substantial. With oxygen at the end of energy pathways, metabolic systems became capable of supporting structures and processes that would have been too costly before. Growth, maintenance, and resilience expanded within the boundaries of cellular control. This advantage arrived with danger intact. Oxygen did not become safe simply because it became useful. The same reactions that yielded extra energy continued producing harmful byproducts. Every gain in efficiency carried the risk of molecular damage. Systems that extracted power from oxygen had to balance benefit against constant chemical threat. Control became as important as access. The machinery required for this balance was intricate and fragile. Pathways had to be tightly regulated. Defenses had to remain active. Errors carried consequence. A breakdown in control meant runaway reactions rather than benefit. Energy extraction and damage mitigation became inseparable processes, linked within the same chemistry. This trade-off shaped survival in subtle ways. Organisms capable of harnessing oxygen did not gain advantage unconditionally. They gained capacity paired with vulnerability. More energy allowed broader activity, but demanded ongoing investment in protection and repair. Life expanded its possibilities while narrowing its margin for error. Not all environments favored this exchange. In oxygen-poor zones, older pathways remained sufficient and safer. In oxygen-rich zones, opportunity and risk rose together. The biosphere did not shift uniformly. It diversified across strategies, some leaning into oxygen's power, others avoiding its costs by retreating or remaining simple. Turning a threat into power did not resolve oxygen's danger, it reframed it. Oxygen became neither enemy nor ally, but a condition that could be leveraged under constraint. Energy abundance did not replace fragility. It coexisted with it. Life that adopted this path carried a permanent tension between gain and loss. This moment did not mark triumph. It marked complexity. Oxygen offered more than destruction, yet demanded vigilance in return. The trade was never free. It bound future life to a world where greater energy came at the price of constant chemical pressure, shaping evolution through compromise rather than conquest. Time stretched this transformation far beyond any single generation of life. Oxygen did not rise quickly because the planet was built to absorb change. Every molecule released entered a world layered with sinks, reactions, and reservoirs that quietly softened its impact. Earth moved slowly because its systems were vast, intertwined, and patient. At the surface, oxygen met materials eager to react. Metals dissolved in seawater bounded immediately. Iron, in particular, acted as a powerful sponge, capturing oxygen and carrying it downward as mineral dust. Each reaction removed oxygen from circulation, returning it to solid form and locking it away in sediments. What reached the atmosphere faced similar resistance. Volcanic gases and reduced minerals reacted quickly, leaving little oxygen free to linger. Below the surface, rock itself participated. Weathering processes consumed oxygen as water flowed through fresh stone. Crustal minerals absorbed it, altered by exposure, and then settled into stable configurations. These reactions unfolded continuously, drawing oxygen into the planet rather than allowing it to accumulate above. Earth did not resist oxygen, it accommodated it. The oceans added another layer of buffering. Their sheer volume diluted new gases, spreading oxygen thinly across immense spaces. Circulation carried it downward, where reactions remained rapid. Thermal layers slowed mixing, delaying surface changes from reaching depth. Each of these processes extended the timeline, ensuring that accumulation occurred only after countless cycles of production and removal. Biology itself contributed to this restraint. Oxygen-producing organisms did not dominate immediately. Their spread was gradual, limited by nutrients, light, and competition. Growth followed environmental opportunity rather than accelerating unchecked. Production increased slowly, step by step, remaining balanced against consumption for long periods. These combined buffers forced oxygen to earn its permanence. Only after sinks filled and reactions slowed did oxygen begin to persist. Even then, accumulation remained incremental, advancing through narrow margins rather than surges. The system adjusted continuously, absorbing new chemistry until its capacity thinned just enough for change to hold. This pacing defines deep time. Events did not align neatly. Processes overlapped, diverged, and reconnected across spans that resist ordinary scale. What appears inevitable in retrospect unfolded as a prolonged negotiation between life and planet, each adjusting in small increments that added up only after immense duration. Because of this, no single moment can be identified as the turning point. Oxygen rose through persistence rather than force. It became part of the atmosphere only after the planet's many buffers had been gradually saturated. Earth allowed change only when it could no longer comfortably contain it. The long delay was not hesitation. It was the natural tempo of a world where chemistry, geology, and biology moved together. Oxygen's rise followed the slow rhythms of a planet designed for endurance, not speed, shaping life through patience measured not in moments, but in ages. Long after the organisms themselves vanished, the planet retained their story in a quieter medium. Stone became the record. Layer by layer, minerals settled from ancient seas, capturing chemistry at the moment it changed. These layers remain today as banded iron formations, immense sequences of rock that alternate in color and composition, stretching across continents. Their structure reflects a rhythm shaped by oxygen's rise. When oxygen encountered dissolved iron in seawater, it forced the metal into solid form, causing it to fall out of suspension and settle onto the seafloor. During periods when oxygen lingered, iron accumulated as dense, rust colored bands. When oxygen faded again, iron remained dissolved, leaving darker layers rich in silica behind. Over time, these alternating conditions stacked themselves into vast geological archives. Each band represents not an event, but a condition sustained long enough to leave a mark. No single layer tells the whole story. Together, they reveal persistence and repetition, oxygen appearing, vanishing, then appearing again with greater regularity. The stone does not rush the narrative. It records patiently, preserving only what endures long enough to crystallize. These formations demonstrate how rocks function as memory. Unlike living tissue, they do not adapt or forget. Once set, their chemistry remains fixed, holding information across spans that exceed biological continuity. Through them, the atmosphere becomes visible after it has passed, translated into mineral arrangements that mirror ancient air and water. Elsewhere, similar records exist in altered minerals, oxidized sediments, and isotopic signatures embedded deep within the crust. Together, they form a distributed archive, written not in symbols, but in chemical relationships. Each shift in atmosphere left traces in how elements bonded, settled, or transformed. Over time, those traces accumulated into patterns readable long after life had moved on. The importance of these stones lies in their silence. They do not preserve the organisms that suffered or survived. Instead, they capture the conditions that shaped those outcomes. Where fossils fail, chemistry persists. The loss of entire biospheres becomes legible not through remains, but through absence marked in rock. Geology offers a different sense of time. It compresses millions of years into meters of stone. It smooths violent transitions into continuous layers. Through this lens, oxygen's rise appears not as catastrophe, but as a gradual rewriting of planetary chemistry. The rock remembers what life could not preserve. Standing today before these ancient formations, it is possible to see Earth thinking slowly. Each band is a memory of balance, held or broken, of reactions repeated until they reshaped the planet. Stone carries the echo of air that no longer exists, and oceans that no longer behave the same way. In this way, the planet keeps its own archive. Long after voices fall silent and bodies dissolve, geology remains, holding the history of transformation in layers that endure beyond life itself. What hides this extinction from view is not its importance, but its manner. It left no single boundary that can be pointed to with certainty. No layer of ash, no sudden collapse preserved in stone, no dramatic shift compressed into a narrow band of time. Its changes unfolded gradually, spread thin across an interval so vast that cause and effect blur together. Later extinctions announce themselves differently. They arrive with sharp edges in the geological record, sudden turnovers, unmistakable losses preserved in fossils large enough to be noticed. Those events are easier to recognize because they interrupt a world that had already learned to leave clear traces of itself. Skeletons, shells, and forests collapse into layers that speak loudly to the present. By comparison, this earlier loss speaks in whispers. Most of the life that disappeared during this time did not leave durable remains. It lived at microscopic scales within water columns and sediments that rarely fossilize well. When these organisms vanished, they left no bones to mark their passing. Their absence registers only indirectly through chemical shifts and missing patterns that require careful interpretation rather than direct observation. The timing also obscures the event. Because the extinction stretched across immense spans of time, it resists the narrative of sudden catastrophe. There was no clear before and after from the perspective of the planet. Loss accumulated slowly as conditions drifted away from compatibility. Each disappearance seemed local, even minor, yet together they reshaped the biosphere more completely than many later disasters. This subtlety causes the event to fade behind more dramatic chapters in Earth's history. When mass extinctions are imagined, they are often associated with violence, impact, fire, or darkness. This one involved chemistry, patience, and inevitability. Its scale becomes visible only when viewed from far enough away, across deep time, rather than moments. Even its evidence demands effort to see. Instead of bones, it left altered minerals. Instead of graveyards, it left gaps. The record is legible only through synthesis, by comparing rocks, chemistry, and surviving lineages that hint at what is missing rather than what remains. The loss exists as a negative space within Earth's story. This invisibility does not mean the extinction was gentle, it means it was thorough. Whole modes of living ended without ceremony. Entire biological worlds disappeared without leaving descendants to remember them. Their designs are lost not because they were insignificant, but because the conditions that supported them slipped away quietly. The difficulty in seeing this event reflects a deeper truth about the planet. Not all turning points announce themselves. Some reshape life through accumulation rather than impact, through changes so slow they escape notice until the world has already become something else. This extinction remains hidden because it did not shout. It simply endured long enough to change everything. The planet did not merely host these changes, it involved them. Earth responded to life's chemistry with adjustments of its own, setting in motion feedbacks that shaped the direction of change. Each interaction altered the next, creating loops that guided the system forward without pause or intention. As oxygen accumulated, it transformed minerals, oceans, and air, and those transformations altered how oxygen behaved in return. When metals locked oxygen into solid form, seafloors changed composition. When nutrients shifted, biological activity adjusted. These responses fed back into production itself, sometimes slowing it, sometimes allowing it to continue. The planet and its life became linked through exchange rather than cause alone. Life was not acting on a static stage. Microbes altered seawater chemistry, which influenced sediment formation, which changed how gases moved between ocean and air. Those atmospheric changes affected temperature, circulation, and weathering, which then reshaped habitats for living organisms. Each step carried consequences that folded back into the system, creating a network of influence rather than a single direction of change. Over time, these feedbacks amplified certain conditions. Oxygen persistence, altered climate, and ocean structure, which favored organisms able to tolerate those shifts. Their activity reinforced the new chemistry, allowing oxygen to remain present longer. In this way, biology and geology co-evolved, each shaping the other through steady interaction rather than dramatic intervention. Earth's surface responded actively as well. Cooling altered erosion rates. Ice and rock exposed fresh minerals, increasing reactions that further adjusted atmospheric composition. Oceans circulated differently as temperature gradients changed, redistributing chemistry across basins. The planet was not resisting or yielding, it was adapting its behavior in response to new conditions. This interplay reveals Earth as dynamic rather than inert. Its systems did not wait for life to finish before responding. They reacted continuously, modulating changes through physical and chemical processes that carried their own momentum. Feedback loops emerged naturally wherever energy, matter, and motion intersected. What makes these loops powerful is their subtlety. No single feedback explains the outcome. Instead, many small adjustments accumulated, steering the planet toward a new equilibrium. Life reshaped the environment, and the environment reshaped life in return, each influencing the other across deep time. Through this lens, Earth appears less like a backdrop and more like a collaborator. It provided materials, absorbed byproducts, adjusted temperatures, and altered circulation, all while responding to the chemistry life introduced. The resulting world was neither designed nor accidental. It was negotiated through interaction. By recognizing Earth as an active participant, the transformation gains clarity. Oxygen did not simply rise because life produced it. It rose because the planet responded in ways that eventually allowed it to stay. Life and Earth moved together, bound by feedback that guided change forward until the planet itself became something new. Oxygen's arrival did not open the door to complexity right away. Instead, it settled into the planet as a background condition, present but not yet transformative. The chemistry of life had changed, yet the structure of ecosystems lagged behind. Possibility existed without immediacy, waiting within constraints that took far longer to loosen. One reason lay in the uneven distribution of oxygen itself. Even after persistence became possible, concentrations remained low and variable. Pockets of the planet experienced more exposure than others, while large regions stayed oxygen poor. Complex life requires consistency. Cells that rely on oxygen benefit only when its presence is reliable enough to support stable metabolism, growth, and reproduction. For a long while, the environment offered fragments rather than continuity. Other bottlenecks emerged through chemistry. Nutrients essential for building complex structures were still limited by altered ocean conditions. Phosphorus, nitrogen, and trace metals moved through new cycles that were not yet efficient. Energy might have been more accessible in theory, but raw materials remained constrained. Without steady access to both, biological complexity could not expand far beyond simple forms. Temperature added another layer of restraint. The planet remained prone to cooling episodes that narrowed habitable zones. Glaciations advanced and retreated, reshaping environments faster than life could experiment safely. Stability returned slowly, in intervals long enough for adaptation, but punctuated enough to discourage elaboration. Complexity favors predictability, and the planet had not yet learned to provide it. Time itself functioned as a barrier. Complex systems require layers of prior solutions to exist first. Multicellular organization depends on communication, regulation, and cooperation between cells, each step building on what came before. Oxygen enabled higher energy yield, but it did not supply the instructions needed to use that energy for coordination. Those instructions emerged gradually, shaped by countless small variations tested across immense duration. Ecology also played a role. With few predators and limited structural niches, there was little pressure driving diversification beyond microbial scales. Simple life still filled available space efficiently. Without competition or opportunity that rewarded complexity, selection favored endurance over experimentation. The planet did not demand more elaborate forms, so they did not yet appear. This delay can feel counterintuitive from the present, where oxygen and complexity seem inseparable. In reality, oxygen was a prerequisite, not a trigger. It created potential without dictating outcome. The path toward complexity required aligned conditions across chemistry, climate, ecology, and time, each arriving slowly and unevenly. Patience defines this chapter of Earth's story. Hundreds of millions of years passed with little visible change. Yet beneath that stillness, foundations were forming. Gradients sharpened, cycles stabilized, genetic innovations accumulated quietly, waiting for environments steady enough to support them. Complex life did not hesitate, it waited. The delay reflects not failure, but the measured pace of a planet assembling the conditions necessary for something fragile, demanding, and new. Expansion returned quietly, without announcement or direction. Life began occupying space again not through sudden innovation, but through cautious extension. Metabolic options diversified. Some organisms explored oxygen rich margins, others lingered at boundaries where older chemistry still held. The biosphere did not surge forward, it tested, paused, and adjusted. These changes unfolded as experiments rather than plans. Small variations appeared in how cells organized, communicated, and shared resources. Some associations persisted, others dissolved. Multicellular arrangements emerged briefly, then vanished, then appeared again in altered form. Nothing about this process suggested inevitability. Each attempt depended on local conditions that could support it for a time. Energy availability played a role, but it did not dictate outcomes. Where oxygen-based metabolism became reliable enough, cells could afford cooperation. Shared effort reduced individual burden. Specialization became possible, though still fragile. These arrangements required stability across generations, something the environment only intermittently provided. Many early experiments failed quietly, leaving little trace beyond genetic echoes. Expansion also occurred sideways rather than upward. New niches formed within sediments, shallow waters, and chemical gradients. Life filled space not by becoming larger or more complex right away, but by becoming more varied. Diversity increased even when structure remained simple. The biosphere gained texture rather than hierarchy. Environmental patience mattered as much as biological change. Climate steadied for longer intervals. Nutrient cycles became more predictable. Oxygen levels, though still modest, fluctuated within narrower ranges. These conditions allowed experiments to last longer before being erased. Duration became as important as design. Survival favored arrangements that could persist through uncertainty rather than those optimized for peak performance. Chance remained embedded in every outcome. Similar experiments appeared in different places, with different fates. Some lineages encountered stability at the right moment and endured. Others dissolved when conditions shifted slightly. Expansion followed opportunity, not destiny. The future remained open, shaped by overlap between biology and environment rather than by direction. This period does not resemble a climb. It resembles a field, slowly repopulating after disturbance, uneven and unpredictable. Growth occurred, but it was restrained, distributed, and reversible. Possibilities widened without commitment. The planet allowed variation while withholding guarantees. Avoiding triumph is essential here. Nothing about this rise ensured what would come later. Many pathways led nowhere. Others remained dormant for vast spans before reappearing in altered worlds. Complexity was not pulling life forward, it was waiting to be tolerated. The slow rise of new possibilities reflects a biosphere learning how to exist within changed conditions. Oxygen expanded what could be attempted, not what would succeed. Life explored this space carefully, shaped by contingency at every step. Expansion resumed, but it did so as exploration, not as progress, unfolding gently across a planet still adjusting to its own transformation. Even after oxygen became familiar, it never became gentle. Its presence reshaped life's possibilities, yet its behavior remained unchanged. Oxygen still reacts readily, still seeks electrons, still alters molecules simply by encountering them. What shifted over time was not the gas itself, but the systems built to endure its constant pressure. Fire offers one of the clearest expressions of this nature. When oxygen meets fuel under the right conditions, energy is released rapidly, transforming matter in moments. The process is not new. It reflects the same chemistry that operates quietly inside cells, only accelerated and uncontained. Combustion reveals how much potential energy oxygen makes accessible and how quickly that energy can become destructive when control fails. Within living systems, oxidation follows similar rules at a slower pace. Oxygen interacts with fats, proteins, and genetic material, altering their structure over time. Even in organisms well adapted to oxygen, this damage accumulates. Cells invest continuously in repair, replacement, and regulation. Aging itself reflects the long balance between energy gained and harm sustained, written gradually into tissues that cannot fully escape chemistry. Protection reduces risk but never removes it. Antioxidant systems intercept many reactions, yet some escape. Repair mechanisms restore function, yet not perfectly. The cost of using oxygen remains ongoing, paid in energy, resources, and gradual wear. Life persists not because oxygen is safe, but because it is manageable within limits. Fire and biology share this constraint. Both rely on oxygen's capacity to release energy. Both require containment to prevent loss. Where containment fails, damage spreads. In forests, lightning and dry seasons reveal how quickly stored energy can return to atmosphere. In cells, stress and imbalance expose similar vulnerability at microscopic scales. The difference lies in scale, not in principle. This danger remains present today. Oxygen enables movement, warmth, and metabolism, yet it also corrodes metals, degrades materials, and drives processes that shorten structural lifespans. Rust, decay, and combustion are not side effects. They are expressions of the same fundamental chemistry that sustains modern life. The stability of the present world rests on balance. Concentrations remain within ranges that allow control. Cycles move energy without overwhelming systems. When those balances shift, oxygen's hazards become visible again, not as anomalies, but as reminders of its nature. Observing oxygen through this lens removes comfort and alarm alike. It reveals continuity. The gas that once ended entire worlds through gradual change remains active, unchanged in character. Life learned to live with it, not to tame it. Safety was never achieved, tolerance was. Oxygen never became a neutral background. It remained a force woven into every process it touches. The modern world operates within this reality, guided by the same chemistry that once reshaped the planet. What endures is not safety, but ongoing negotiation between benefit and damage, sustained moment by moment. The present atmosphere exists within a narrow range shaped by long negotiation between life and planet. Oxygen neither overwhelms the system nor retreats from it. Instead, it remains suspended at levels that allow energy-rich metabolism while still demanding constant management. This balance did not arise quickly, and it did not arise freely. It is the product of countless interactions, refined across deep time. Modern oxygen levels are maintained through opposing flows. Life produces oxygen through photosynthesis, releasing it steadily into air and water. At the same time, oxygen is consumed through respiration, decay, weathering, and chemical reactions that return it to minerals and compounds. These processes counter one another, preventing runaway accumulation or sudden loss. The atmosphere remains stable not because it resists change, but because change moves along channels that oppose excess. This balance rests on physical conditions that are precise. Surface temperatures allow liquid water to circulate. Continents expose minerals that absorb oxygen while forests and oceans replenish it. Ice, rock, soil, and life interact continuously, each moderating the others. If any component shifts too far, compensation follows, not instantly, but persistently. The fragility lies in dependence rather than weakness. Modern ecosystems assume oxygen availability within a specific range. Too little would constrain metabolism. Too much would increase oxidative pressure and fire frequency beyond manageable limits. The current atmosphere supports complexity precisely because it occupies this middle space. Outside it, familiar systems would strain or fail. This narrow window also reflects historical contingency. Life that exists today is built around these conditions. Cells, tissues, and ecosystems evolved under oxygen levels that stabilized only after immense delay. The present is not optimized, it is tolerated. Organisms function because the environment remains close enough to what their chemistry expects. Geology continues to play a role. Weathering rates, volcanic activity, and sediment burial quietly adjust oxygen sinks and sources. Oceans absorb and release gases as temperatures shift. Forests expand and contract. Each movement nudges the balance without overturning it. Stability emerges from constant motion rather than stillness. Nothing about this equilibrium is dramatic. It does not announce itself. The atmosphere remains clear. Breathing feels effortless. Yet beneath that ease lies a finely tuned exchange, maintained through processes that could drift if conditions slowly changed. The calm of the present reflects alignment rather than permanence. Understanding this window does not require alarm or reassurance. It invites perspective. Oxygen once reshaped the planet without violence, simply by persisting. Today, its presence remains conditional, held in place by systems that have learned how to coexist with its nature. The air we move through carries this history invisibly. Its composition reflects survival, loss, adjustment, and endurance layered across time. The narrowness of this window is not a warning. It is a record. Earth arrived here through patience, and the balance we inhabit remains part of a long continuum shaped by chemistry, life, and the steady movement of a living planet. The absence is what remains most clearly. Entire worlds of life once filled oceans and sediments with movement, exchange, and continuity. Yet they left almost nothing behind. No skeletons mark their passing. No descendants carry their designs forward. Their existence is known only through hints preserved indirectly in the planet's altered chemistry. These lost forms lived at scales and in conditions that resist preservation. Soft-bodied, microscopic, and deeply integrated into water and mud, they dissolved back into their surroundings when conditions shifted. Fossilization favors hardness and size. It records shells, bones, and structures built to persist. The earliest biosphere relied instead on chemistry and membranes, forms too fragile to survive deep time intact. What vanished were not isolated species, but entire ways of living, metabolisms that shaped oceans, interactions that cycled elements through water and rock, communities that functioned for hundreds of millions of years before quietly ending. When oxygen altered their environment beyond tolerance, these systems unraveled without leaving monuments to themselves. The fossil record reflects this loss through silence. Certain isotopic patterns end, chemical signatures fade, rock layers change character without revealing the lives that once created them. The story is told through absence, inferred rather than observed. What remains are gaps where complexity once existed in forms unfamiliar to the present. This invisibility invites restraint in imagination. These organisms were not primitive prototypes waiting to be replaced. They were complete in their own time, adapted precisely to the conditions that sustained them. Their erasure does not reflect failure, only misalignment with a transformed planet. When the rules changed, their existence became untenable. Quiet reverence suits this chapter because nothing dramatic marks the ending. No impact crater separates before and after. No boundary layer announces loss. Life simply grew thinner, then thinner still. Eventually, some lineages reached zero without acknowledgement. Their disappearance blended into the slow movement of oceans and the steady settling of sediments. Even today, echoes of this lost diversity persist only faintly. Modern anaerobic environments resemble fragments of those ancient worlds, yet they are incomplete. They hint at what once was without reconstructing it fully. The original breadth of those ecosystems remains beyond recovery. This loss reshapes how Earth's history is understood. Survival often feels central because survivors leave records. Extinction at microbial scales feels abstract because it leaves so little behind. Yet, numerically and functionally, the erased biosphere represented a profound portion of life's early experiment. The planet continues without remembering these lives directly. Rock retains only the consequences of their absence. In this way, Earth carries a quiet memorial, written not in fossils, but in chemistry. Lost worlds remain unmarked, yet foundational, reminding us that most of life's history passed without leaving names, shapes, or stories behind. Only the altered planet that followed. Patterns emerge only when viewed from far enough away. Across Earth's history, life repeatedly altered its surroundings in ways that exceeded local consequence. What began as successful strategies at small scales accumulated until planetary systems shifted in response. Each time, the trigger was not intention or excess, but persistence. Life changes environments simply by existing. Metabolism produces byproducts. Growth redistributes matter. Entire ecosystems rearrange chemical flows as they spread. These changes usually remain contained, absorbed by surrounding systems. Over long durations, however, accumulation alters thresholds that once held steady. The planet responds, adjusting chemistry, climate, and circulation in ways that reshape the conditions life depends upon. This pattern does not belong to any single event. Oxygen's rise stands as an early example, but it is not unique. The mechanism repeats whenever biological activity modifies fundamental planetary processes. What makes it effective is that success compounds. A metabolic innovation spreads because it works locally. As it spreads, its influence multiplies. Eventually, the collective outcome diverges from the conditions that originally supported it. Unintended consequence defines this sequence. Life does not seek disruption, it seeks continuity. Yet continuity achieved at scale can strain the systems that made it possible. Oxygen was a waste product before it was an atmosphere. Its danger emerged only after enough of it accumulated to overwhelm Earth's buffers. The crisis followed success, not failure. This dynamic unfolds slowly enough that it escapes immediate correction. Feedback loops respond, but often lag behind biological expansion. By the time planetary systems adjust, life has already reshaped its environment substantially. The correction then arrives as a shift in conditions rather than a targeted response. Life adapts if possible. If not, it recedes. From a planetary perspective, this cycle reflects interaction rather than error. Earth is not mismanaged by life, it is influenced by it. Each biological innovation alters energy flow, material cycling, and atmospheric composition. The planet reacts according to physics and chemistry, not preference. Life then responds to the new environment created by its own activity. This relationship continues without memory or foresight. No previous crisis prevents the next. Each unfolds within unique circumstances, shaped by current geography, climate, and biosphere. The repetition lies in structure, not in outcome. Life expands, conditions shift, compatibility is tested. What persists is not dominance, but negotiation. Life and planet continually adjust to one another across deep time. Crises emerge when balance drifts too far before correction catches up. These moments are not punishments, they are recalibrations within a dynamic system. Understanding this pattern reframes extinction and transformation. They are not aberrations interrupting an otherwise stable story. They are integral passages within a living planet. Earth evolves alongside its biosphere, responding to biological change with physical consequence. Life keeps triggering its own crises because it is inseparable from the systems it alters. Each success carries influence beyond intention. The planet absorbs that influence until it must respond, reshaping the conditions that life then encounters. This cycle defines Earth's history, not as a sequence of mistakes, but as an ongoing exchange between biology and the world it inhabits. Long before the planet experienced sudden losses, a quieter pattern had already taken shape. This first great transformation established a structure that would repeat, not in detail, but in shape. Conditions changed. Life responded. The response altered the world further. Eventually, compatibility narrowed and disappearance followed. What mattered was not the cause, but the sequence. A biological innovation spread because it worked within existing systems. Over time, its influence accumulated beyond local scales. Planetary chemistry and climate adjusted in response, shifting slowly until older ecosystems no longer fit. The resulting loss was not abrupt, yet it was widespread. This pattern became a template, one that would echo through later eras in different forms. The precedent lay in feedback. Life altered Earth in ways that could not be fully reversed once thresholds were crossed. The planet absorbed change until it could not. Adjustment then arrived as a new environment rather than a correction to the old one. Organisms faced a choice shaped by circumstance rather than agency: persist, adapt, or vanish. Later extinctions would follow this rhythm, though their triggers would vary. Some involved climate shifts, others unfolded through chemistry, circulation, or geography. What united them was the relationship between biological success and planetary response. Life's expansion reshaped conditions. Those conditions tested life in return. This early event demonstrated that loss need not arrive through catastrophe. It showed that gradual change could erase vast portions of the biosphere without spectacle. The absence of violence did not lessen impact. Instead, it revealed how effectively slow processes could restructure life on Earth. The calm inevitability of this pattern emerges only in retrospect. Each stage unfolded without awareness of its outcome. No mechanism existed to halt accumulation once it gained momentum. By the time consequences became unavoidable, the system had already committed to a new state. Reversal required forces larger than those that caused the change, and those forces did not arrive. This blueprint does not predict outcomes, it describes dynamics. Life interacts with its environment, the environment responds, balance shifts, loss follows where compatibility fails. Renewal may come later, shaped by what remains. The sequence repeats without intention, governed by physical law and biological persistence rather than design. Recognizing this pattern reframes extinction as process rather than interruption. Each event grows out of long preparation rather than sudden failure. The biosphere carries momentum forward, and Earth responds accordingly. Loss is woven into transformation, not as punishment, but as consequence. This first extinction did not merely remove life, it revealed how the planet operates. It demonstrated that Earth and life are inseparable, bound by feedbacks that carry both forward. Later extinctions would follow different paths, yet they would trace the same outline, shaped by gradual change, delayed response, and eventual narrowing of possibilities. The precedent endures quietly. It rests beneath every later reshaping of the biosphere, not as warning or lesson, but as structure. Earth moves patiently, and life moves with it, through cycles that begin with success and end in change, repeated across deep time with steady inevitability. Oxygen occupies an unusual place in Earth's history because its influence cannot be separated into benefit or harm. It altered the planet by expanding what chemistry could do, while simultaneously narrowing which forms of life could persist. Its role is best understood not as an outcome, but as a condition that reshaped limits across every scale. Once oxygen became established, it changed how energy moved through living systems. Reactions that once yielded modest returns could now release far more usable power. Cells gained access to deeper chemical gradients, allowing more sustained activity, repair, and structural complexity. This expansion did not arrive as liberation. It arrived as increased tension within every organism that relied on it. The same properties that enable oxygen to support high energy metabolism also ensure continual damage. Reactivity remains intrinsic. Oxygen interacts whether invited or not, altering molecules over time even under careful control. Life's relationship with oxygen therefore became one of management. Systems evolved to regulate exposure, limit harm, and repair what could not be protected. None of this changed oxygen's nature. It altered life's tolerance. At the planetary level, this duality persisted. Oxygen reshaped climates by interacting with atmospheric gases. It altered oceans by removing dissolved materials essential to earlier ecosystems. It contributed to cooling even as it expanded biological potential. Each effect followed from chemistry rather than intention. Expansion and contraction occurred together, bound to the same cause. Calling oxygen a gift does not imply generosity, it implies consequence. The planet inherited a condition that made new forms possible while closing others permanently. Oxygen enabled complexity at the cost of stability. It allowed long chains of energy transfer while demanding constant compensation. The biosphere that emerged afterward carried both gains and constraints forward. This framing removes judgment. Oxygen did not favor outcomes. It enforced trade-offs. Life that aligned with its chemistry endured. Life that could not withdrew or vanished. The atmosphere became a selective environment defined by reactivity rather than abundance alone. Even today, oxygen's presence defines boundaries. Materials degrade, systems require maintenance. Fire remains possible wherever fuel and oxygen meet. Biology depends on control rather than absence of risk. The planet operates within this condition continuously, shaped by balance rather than resolution. What makes oxygen uniquely influential is not that it supports life, but that it demands response. It reshapes environments simply by persisting. Once present, it cannot be ignored, neutralized, or simplified away. Everything that exists within its reach must account for it. Seen across deep time, oxygen becomes a force that expands potential while enforcing cost. It allows more to happen while narrowing margins. It brings power without safety, possibility without promise. The Earth that followed oxygen's rise is neither improved nor damaged in isolation. It is changed. Oxygen's role remains consistent across eras. It offers no preference. It imposes chemistry. Life adapts where possible, withdraws where necessary, and persists where alignment holds. In this way, oxygen stands as one of Earth's most consequential conditions, not because of what it grants, but because of what it requires. Inside modern cells, a quiet inheritance persists, one that links present life to ancient worlds now gone. This legacy does not announce itself through form or fossil. It exists as process, embedded within the smallest units of living matter, carrying the imprint of events that unfolded long before complex life appeared. Mitochondria occupy this role quietly. They are structures within cells that handle energy flow, guiding chemical reactions that sustain movement, growth, and repair. Their presence feels ordinary now, yet their origin lies far outside the lineage of complex organisms. Long ago, they began as independent bacteria, living freely in environments shaped by rising oxygen. These bacteria possessed a metabolism suited to the new atmospheric conditions. They could handle oxygen's reactivity and extract energy from it efficiently. When conditions grew hostile for oxygen-sensitive life, this ability became valuable. Rather than remaining separate, some of these bacteria entered other cells and stayed. What began as proximity became integration. Over time, boundaries blurred. The internalized bacteria lost their independence, transferring much of their genetic material to the host cell. They specialized, focusing on energy conversion while relying on the surrounding cell for protection and resources. This relationship stabilized not as conquest, but as accommodation shaped by survival pressures on both sides. The resulting partnership reshaped the trajectory of life. Cells that contained mitochondria gained access to greater energy availability, enough to support larger size, internal complexity, and slower but more controlled growth. This shift did not guarantee success. It expanded potential while maintaining cost. Oxygen metabolism continued to produce damage, requiring repair systems and regulation. Complexity arrived alongside vulnerability. What matters is continuity. Modern cells still carry mitochondria that resemble their bacterial ancestors. Their membranes, genetic remnants, and division patterns preserve this history. Each breath taken by complex organisms traces back to this ancient arrangement, forged during a time when oxygen demanded new strategies for endurance. This legacy connects past to present without symbolism. The partnership formed under pressure, shaped by necessity rather than foresight. It persists because it works within the conditions Earth provides. Oxygen remains reactive. energy remains essential. Cells manage both through systems inherited from that distant merger. The presence of mitochondria does not mark progress, it marks adaptation within constraint. Life incorporated a solution that carried risk alongside advantage, embedding that risk permanently into cellular function. Modern organisms continue to balance energy production against oxidative damage, a negotiation inherited from the first cells that made this transition. Every movement, every sustained process in complex life depends on this ancient compromise. The past lives on not as memory, but as mechanism. Cells perform chemistry refined under early planetary stress, maintaining alignment with an environment shaped by oxygen's persistence. This legacy remains invisible because it is universal. It does not stand apart as a relic. It operates continuously, linking modern life to a time when survival depended on absorbing change rather than resisting it. Inside each cell, Earth's deep history continues quietly, carried forward through structures that remember without awareness and function without pause. Survival, when traced across deep time, never follows a straight line. It depends on circumstance, layered upon circumstance, each moment shaped by conditions that could easily have shifted another way. The persistence of life reflects not inevitability, but alignment between chance and environment, sustained long enough to continue. At every stage, existence balanced on narrow margins, small variations in chemistry altered which reactions could proceed. Slight changes in temperature restructured circulation in oceans and air. Local conditions determined whether organisms endured or faded, often without connection to strength or sophistication. Survival favored compatibility, not resilience alone. This fragility is written into the planet's history. Entire lineages vanished not because they failed to adapt broadly, but because specific thresholds were crossed. Once crossed, prior advantages offered little protection. Life that endured did so because circumstances remained tolerable just long enough for adjustment, or because it occupied niches buffered from the most extreme shifts. Contingency shaped outcomes repeatedly. A minor delay in oxygen accumulation allowed some organisms time to develop defenses. A patch of anoxic sediment provided refuge while surrounding regions changed. A symbiotic relationship formed under pressure and persisted because it worked. None of these events carried guarantee. Each represented a narrow window that happened to remain open. This perspective resists narratives of progress. No species was destined to succeed. No pathway led inevitably toward complexity. Many experiments unfolded simultaneously, most of them ending without trace. What remains represents a fraction of what was possible, filtered through layers of chance and constraint. The fragility extends beyond early life. Even as biological systems grew more intricate, dependency increased. Complex metabolisms required stable conditions. Larger structures demanded consistent energy flow. Expansion created vulnerability, tying survival to environments that could shift slowly, yet decisively. Human presence does not stand apart from this pattern. Our biology relies on conditions inherited from countless earlier contingencies. The oxygen we depend upon once erased much of the biosphere. The cellular machinery that sustains us arose through ancient coincidence. Nothing about this path suggests exemption from the forces that shaped it. Recognizing contingency does not diminish life's persistence. It clarifies it. Survival reflects continuous negotiation rather than triumph. Each organism occupies a balance point that can be maintained, disrupted, or lost depending on factors beyond control. Earth's history shows that fragility accompanies endurance. Life continues because it adapts where possible and recedes where necessary. Stability emerges temporarily, never permanently. Change remains constant, sometimes subtle, sometimes transformative. This understanding reframes continuity as provisional. Life survives not because it must, but because conditions permit it to do so for a time. Every epoch carries its own balance, its own risks, and its own narrow margins. Survival was never guaranteed. It unfolded through a sequence of alignments, some lasting long enough to build complexity, others closing before leaving record. What persists today reflects not destiny, but survival through coincidence layered upon coincidence, carried forward within a living planet that has always remained capable of reshaping the terms of existence. Earth encountered its first great test without announcement or intent. No signal marked the beginning. The planet simply entered a period where conditions shifted beyond familiar boundaries, and life was forced to respond within those changes. This was not a challenge posed to individual species, but a trial imposed on the entire biosphere at once. The test unfolded across oceans, skies, and sediments simultaneously. Chemistry changed its behavior. Energy pathways reorganized. Interactions that once fit together cleanly began to drift apart. Life did not face an opponent. It faced altered rules. Survival depended on how closely organisms aligned with the new state of the planet rather than on strength, complexity, or abundance. Adaptation became the only measure that mattered. Dominance offered no protection. Organisms that had shaped vast portions of the early biosphere found themselves incompatible with the shifting environment they helped create. Others, often smaller or more flexible, endured because their biology happened to tolerate the new conditions. Success emerged quietly, without replacement ceremonies or clear transitions. This planetary trial operated across immense scales of time and space. Local refuges formed while surrounding regions transformed. Shallow waters responded differently than deep basins. Atmospheric layers changed in sequence rather than all at once. Each gradient created opportunities for some and limits for others, distributing survival unevenly across the globe. What makes this test foundational is not its outcome, but its scope. For the first time, life confronted a transformation that could not be avoided through movement alone. The planet itself had shifted. Escape routes closed slowly but comprehensively. Adaptation required internal change rather than relocation. Those lineages that persisted did so by adjusting metabolism, restructuring interactions, or retreating into environments less exposed to the new chemistry. None of these strategies guaranteed longevity. They simply permitted continuation under revised constraints. Life moved forward by narrowing its possibilities, not by expanding control. The test reshaped Earth as well as life. Atmospheric composition stabilized into a new balance. Oceans adopted different chemical baselines. Surface conditions cooled and reorganized circulation patterns. The planet emerged altered, carrying the imprint of the trial within its systems. This moment established a principle that would echo through later history. Earth does not reward dominance, it favors compatibility. Life that persists does so because it fits within prevailing conditions, not because it overwhelms them. When the planet changes, survival depends on adjustment rather than conquest. Seen from a distance, this first great test appears calm. No singular instant defines it. Its impact becomes visible only across long spans, through absence as much as presence. Entire worlds of life passed through it without crossing into the next state. Earth continued afterward, not resolved, but transformed. Life continued as well, reshaped by what it endured. The test did not end in victory or defeat. It concluded in a new equilibrium, vast in scale and indifferent to individual outcomes. This early trial revealed how the planet and biosphere interact when limits shift. It showed that endurance belongs to those able to adapt within planetary change, and that Earth itself remains the ultimate context in which all living possibility is tested. Each breath carries more than oxygen. It carries the residue of decisions life once made without awareness, consequences shaped slowly, then locked into the planet itself. The air that surrounds us is not neutral space. It is history made present, altered by disappearance as much as by survival. Long before lungs or leaves, changes unfolded that thinned worlds and erased countless forms of living chemistry. The atmosphere we inherit was carved into shape as much by what vanished as by what endured. Oxygen accumulated, not through intention, but through persistence, and its rise reshaped Earth by removing possibilities as surely as it created new ones. What we breathe today reflects that narrowing. Entire metabolisms no longer function in open air. Ancient ecosystems that once filled oceans and sediments survive only in fragments, confined to protected margins. The atmosphere bears witness to these losses quietly through its composition, its reactivity, its demands placed on life. Modern organisms live inside this inheritance. Every cell manages oxygen carefully, regulating exposure, repairing damage, balancing benefit against cost. This work echoes ancient pressures. The same chemical force that once erased vast lineages still requires constant negotiation. Survival continues, not because the danger ended, but because life learned how to coexist with it. Extinction shaped the sky long before it shaped stories. The removal of methane altered the climate. The oxidation of oceans changed circulation and nutrient flow. Cooling episodes followed. Each loss left its mark in air and stone, guiding the trajectory that followed. The atmosphere remembers because it could not forget. It carries forward the outcomes of events that never announce themselves. This remembrance does not rest in drama, it rests in steadiness. The air remains stable enough to support complexity, yet reactive enough to prevent rest. It enforces balance through constant motion, held in place by living and non-living processes acting together. What feels effortless emerges from continuous exchange. Breathing becomes a quiet participation in this history, not as observer and not as culmination, but as continuation. The oxygen entering the body connects modern life to ancient transformations that unfolded across deep time. It links present metabolism to vanished worlds without distinction or hierarchy. Nothing about this continuity implies resolution. The atmosphere remains dynamic, shaped by life while shaping it in return. The same patterns of interaction persist, moderated by current conditions, open to change without certainty of outcome. Earth continues its long negotiation between chemistry and biology, indifferent to individual forms yet sustaining the process itself. The air that remembers does not speak. It does not warn or promise. It simply persists, carrying forward a record written through accumulation, adjustment, and loss. Each moment of breathing aligns briefly with that record, sharing space with consequences older than any living memory. In this way, the story does not close. It remains present, circulating silently, held within the atmosphere itself. The planet moves forward as it always has, through continuity shaped by disappearance as much as endurance, and life continues within that movement, breathing the past while inhabiting the moment, without finish or final word.